I woke up that morning with a feeling like sand was stuck in my throat, and even water didn't help. It wasn't a hangover, and it wasn't lack of sleep. It was something else, that jittery edge you get before a sprint where you're not racing against the stopwatch, but against every mistake you've ever made. My name's Max, I'm a personal trainer in Dallas, and if that sounds ordinary, it's only until I tell you that I took $5 million from the Gulf Cartel. Not out of stupidity, not for the thrill, and not because I had some movie-style fantasy. I took that money because one day I realized my life already belonged to someone else, and I was just renting my own name. I thought I could break that contract. I thought I could step out of the gym where the air always smelled like rubber and sweat and finally breathe something else. And yes, I thought I could outsmart the kind of people you don't even text without encrypted apps and burner phones. Looking back now, it sounds insane, but at the time it felt like the only logical choice. My day usually started at 5. I'd open the studio on Fort Worth Avenue, turn on the warm lights, check the protein bars and supplements, then roll out the mat I hated. Not because of the workouts, but because that mat had seen every version of me. After the lockdowns, I managed to spin up a small business. I worked with managers, moms on maternity leave, a couple cops, some semi-pro athletes, and one client who's the reason I'm even telling this story. He called himself Rick. Baseball caps without logos, a belly he wanted to hide under abs before summer. Which was funny, because summer always brought sudden business trips, and in the fall he'd return with strange new requests. A storage unit for sports equipment. A surgeon for his friend with a shoulder injury. Early morning sessions when the gym was still empty. I told myself he was just some weird rich guy with habits I didn't need to understand. I didn't want to think otherwise. The turning point came when he brought in a backpack that looked heavier than any I'd ever seen. The smell hit me first, not gas, not smoke, but that raw plastic scent of something freshly wrapped. He dropped it in the corner, said he'd grab it after training. I led him through the usual hour, squats, planks, cardio. He cursed under his breath, I counted reps. When he went to shower, I was alone with the bag and the silence. And in silence, the worst ideas come. I touched the zipper. It pushed back, like a warning, and I pulled anyway. Inside were bricks of cash bound with rubber bands, and a dirty scrap of paper with 2 letters and an address in Irving. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would scratch the plastic and give me away. I zipped it back up, put it down like nothing happened. But I had seen. And once you see, you can unsee. I could have stopped right there. Told myself other people's money is other people's death. But that night, reality cracked me in half. The studio rent was climbing. Insurance was eating me alive. My dad was lying in a hospital bed in San Antonio, with a bill grinning at me from the browser window. I was furious at every influencer selling fake motivation and at myself for buying into it. I kept spinning the wheel in my head. How do I get out of these endless mornings and side hustles that never cover enough? That backpack became an answer I never asked for but couldn't shake. I convinced myself it wasn't robbery, it was more like correcting an unfair equation. My girlfriend at the time used to say justice is just someone's personal math. I did my math. The sum looked clean. But it was a trap. Weeks went by and I started testing the edges. Watching Rick's patterns, his moods, the gaps in his schedule. He disappeared for 4 days, came back with fresh scars and another bag. I knew this wasn't some quirky client. The gym smelled of metal and chlorine. He reeked of risk. When he asked me to watch his equipment until evening, the ice finally cracked. I had the keys to a storage unit in Irving where he sometimes went. I carried that bag like it was someone else's child, dropped it off, came back. Didn't open it there. I didn't need to. I opened it later, alone in the studio. And in my head, a sentence formed: if my choice is between lifelong debt or one crime, I'll take the crime. That sentence was the biggest lie I've ever told myself. The plan didn't come from courage, it came from terror. Terror of being crushed by a life too small to breathe in. I decided not to take everything. Just enough to change my world, not enough to tip theirs too quickly. I calculated the usual amounts that moved, checked the cameras in the hall, noted the days when the building's guard liked to nap. I rearranged my clients' schedules so no one would walk in at the wrong hour. I bought burner phones with cash, copied the keys while Rick caught his breath between sets. It all felt like prep for a weight way heavier than my heart could handle. But worse than all that was the taste of control I hadn't felt in years. For once, I had a lever. A lever that could flip the whole table. The day I acted was hot and sticky, a Dallas summer that makes you sweat even in shade. I showed up early, checked the cameras, set timers on the lights to make the place look alive. Opened the unit, 3 bags. 2 heavy, 1 light. I took the 2 heavy ones, staged the pickups in 2 rounds, 2 routes, through neighborhoods where nobody notices faces. The car reeked of cheap air freshener trying to smother the smell of money. I drove those bags with the same precision I used to correct people's sweat forms, convinced I could pull this off clean. When I came back, though, a detail flipped everything. On the chair was Rick's phone. He never left it behind. Not even for a shower. The screen blinked with a message from a contact I didn't recognize, just 2 letters and a 6-digit code. I didn't touch it, didn't want fingerprints. But I knew the clock had already switched sides. I stashed the cash, hid it in places no one searches, and left. That night, Rick didn't show. The next day either. On the 3rd, a man called with a voice flat as asphalt. He told me to check the unit, said our friend wasn't answering. I drove there, opened it, saw the lone 3rd bag, and the empty spaces where the others had been. I acted surprised, even fooled myself a little. Then I drove away, heart pounding like I'd pulled off the impossible. At home, I dumped the money on the floor. I didn't count bills, I counted stacks. Boxed them in old shoe boxes, protein containers, even an emptied vacuum with a clean bag. The sum looked like every moment I'd walked past a store window pretending I didn't need what I couldn't afford. Now I needed only one thing: invisibility. I swapped my car for an old pickup through a friend, prepaid rent in a rundown complex that smelled like rotting wood, burned my workout gloves because they belonged to the version of me that still believed in Google Calendars and futures. I thought I'd taken less than they'd notice. I was wrong. 2 days later, I caught the reflection of a headlight sticking to me too long on Russell Avenue. I changed lanes, it followed. Went into a supermarket to buy pointless things ordinary people buy. They didn't follow inside. They waited outside, where courtesy doesn't count. That night I didn't sleep. I filled notebooks with possible scenarios, knowing the real one was already in motion without me. I was just an actor who'd lost the script. I don't romanticize what I did. It wasn't justice, wasn't noble, wasn't brave. It was a choice made by someone tired of pretending he couldn't see his own limits. I took 5 million from people who don't forgive even accidents, let alone betrayal. And this was just the beginning. Next came names I never wanted to know, addresses I had no business being near, and lessons they don't print in self-help books. This is the confession of how a Dallas trainer thought he could lift a weight that breaks spines. The first week after I took the money felt like standing in front of a mirror that wouldn't show my reflection. I kept waking up too early, convinced someone was in the room, that a doorknob would turn, that headlights would sweep across the blinds. I tried to keep training clients like nothing had changed, but I couldn't stop scanning the parking lot before every session. I'd count the cars, memorize the plates, note who left and who lingered. I wasn't paranoid for sport. I was paranoid because I knew exactly who I had crossed. The hardest part wasn't hiding the cash, it was hiding the shift in me. Clients noticed. One of the cops I trained asked if I was cutting weight, because my face looked leaner, sharper. I told him I was trying a new diet. In truth, the stress burned through me faster than any cardio routine I'd ever designed. I dropped 10 pounds in 2 weeks, my hands shook when I tried to hold a stopwatch, and I kept losing my voice when I barked out rep counts. I stopped visiting my dad. I couldn't bear the thought of showing up at the hospital, pretending to be a regular son with regular problems, when I had millions hidden in protein containers at home. I sent him money anonymously instead, enough to cover the bills. The nurses probably thought some charity had stepped in. In a twisted way, it made me feel good, like maybe stealing from the cartel could be rebranded in my head as saving my father. That illusion held me together for a while. But illusions crack. It started with Rick's absence stretching too long. No texts, no calls, no annoyed messages asking why I hadn't answered his voicemails. Then came the men. They didn't walk into the gym like clients. They leaned against the wall outside, sunglasses on, pretending to check their phones. When I finally approached them, one smiled without his eyes and asked if I'd seen Rick. I said no, I hadn't, not for a while. They nodded, like they didn't need the answer anyway. I went back inside, and my stomach felt like wet cement. That night, I drove 2 towns over just to buy groceries, thinking distance could protect me. When I pulled into my complex, the black sedan I'd seen on Russell Avenue was parked near the dumpster. Not blocking me, not threatening, just sitting there. The message was clear: we see you. I sat in my truck for 15 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt, before I forced myself to get out and walk inside. Every step felt like a test, like they wanted to see if I'd bolt. I didn't. Not that night. Sleep stopped coming. I'd lie in bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, imagining footsteps on the stairs. Every creak of the building was an intruder. I started keeping a kitchen knife on the nightstand, then upgraded to a pistol I bought through a friend of a friend, no paperwork. I wasn't a gun guy, but fear makes you expand your vocabulary. The real breaking point was when one of my clients, a woman in her 30s who came 3 times a week, mentioned casually that she'd seen my buddies waiting for me outside the gym. I asked what she meant. She said 2 men in suits had asked about me, whether I lived nearby, whether I always kept the same schedule. She laughed it off, said I must be popular. I forced a smile and changed the subject, but inside I was shaking. They weren't just watching anymore. They were planting questions. I tried to move the money again. Packed it into boxes, drove out toward Oklahoma under the cover of night. Halfway there, I realized the paranoia would follow me no matter where I dumped it. The money wasn't currency anymore, it was a magnet. It pulled eyes, questions, consequences. I turned the truck around, drove back, and hit it again. This time in an abandoned storage unit I paid cash for under a fake name. I told myself it was safer there, but deep down I knew it was just a countdown. One night I got a call from a blocked number. A voice I didn't recognize asked me a simple question. "Are you loyal?" I froze. Didn't answer. The voice repeated the question, calm, patient. I hung up. 2 minutes later, another call came in, same question. I didn't pick up. I turned off the phone, pulled the battery, and sat in the dark until the sun came up. Every part of me knew what was happening. They weren't coming for Rick anymore. They were coming for me. And I had no idea how long the window was between being a suspect and being a target. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was a problem I could outwork, like a set of squats or a diet plan. This wasn't about discipline or willpower. This was about survival. And survival meant doing something reckless, something permanent. I had 5 million reasons to run, and 1 million ways to get caught. By the time the second month rolled around, I wasn't living a life anymore. I was running laps in a maze I had built with my own hands, and every turn led me back to the same black sedan, the same silent watchers, the same phone calls that didn't need words. My clients started dropping off one by one. Some said work got too busy, others claimed money was tight, but I knew the truth. Nobody likes training with someone who looks like he hasn't slept in weeks, who scans the mirrors not for form but for shadows. The gym that once felt like a small empire was now just 4 walls echoing with my own nerves. Money was supposed to buy me freedom. Instead, it bought me paranoia. Every time I opened one of those protein containers or shoeboxes stuffed with bills, it didn't feel like wealth. It felt like radiation. Like I was poisoning myself just by being near it. I couldn't spend it the way I wanted. A brand new car would scream too loud. A fancy apartment would raise eyebrows. Even cash medical bills for my dad risked drawing attention if the amounts looked off. So the money just sat there, mocking me, while I drowned in fear. I tried to tell myself I could launder it. Flip it through small businesses, maybe buy into a bar or car wash. But those weren't just schemes and TV shows, they were cartel territory. I'd be walking right back into their backyard. The truth was uglier. The only safe way to move that kind of cash was through the very people I had stolen it from. Then came the night they knocked. 3 slow raps at 2 in the morning. Not pounding, not demanding, just calm, like they already owned the place. I froze in bed, hand clutching the pistol, breath stuck in my throat. The knocking stopped, but I didn't move. I sat there in the dark until sunrise, my finger numb on the trigger. When I finally looked outside, nothing was there. No car, no footprints. Just the knowledge that they wanted me to know they could touch my door whenever they pleased. The next morning, I drove aimlessly through Dallas, trying to decide if I should run. South to Mexico, north to Canada, anywhere but here. But the reality kept slamming me in the chest. You can't outrun people who already live in every shadow you see. Even if I vanished, the money couldn't vanish with me. Cash that size has a scent. Dogs can smell it. People can smell it. That afternoon, I found a note taped to the inside of my truck's windshield. Just one sentence. 5 is heavy. No name, no threat, no instructions. Just that reminder. They knew. They had known all along. I lost it. For the first time since stealing the bags, I broke down. I screamed in the cab until my throat burned, slammed my fists against the steering wheel until the horn blared. I didn't care who saw. Rage and despair twisted into something ugly, something close to madness. I wanted to burn the money, to dump it in the Trinity River, to erase the weight crushing me. But I couldn't. Even if I set fire to every bill, they wouldn't believe I had. They'd think I hid it. They'd keep coming. That night, I drove out to the storage unit, pulled the boxes into the open, and just sat there staring at them. My whole life in cardboard, yet none of it belonged to me. I thought about calling the cops. Telling them everything, handing over the cash, begging for witness protection. But I knew how it worked. The cartel had ears in the force, and once I opened my mouth, I'd be a corpse with a file number. The only option left was to play their game. I had to give the money back, at least most of it, and hope they'd let me crawl away with my life. It felt pathetic, like bending to the bully after one brave punch. But survival doesn't care about pride. Survival only cares about breathing tomorrow. So I started planning my surrender. Not to the police, not to the system, but directly to them. Which meant I had to find them first before they decided to find me on their own terms. And if that sounds like suicide, it's because it probably was. That was the night I stopped being a trainer who stole from the wrong man. That was the night I became prey negotiating with the predator. The plan to return the money wasn't something I mapped out on a whiteboard or brainstormed with a buddy over beers. It was a slow bleed of desperation, built from scraps of paranoia and half-baked courage. I kept circling the same thought. If they wanted me dead, I'd already be gone. The fact that I was still breathing meant they wanted something else. Respect, obedience, or simply the satisfaction of watching me bend. I started with Rick's phone. The one he'd left in the gym like a breadcrumb. I still had it, hidden in a shoebox under the bed, powered off since that day. I knew turning it on was like lighting a flare, but it was the only thread I had to pull. One night, after 2 shots of whiskey that did nothing for my nerves, I powered it up. It buzzed to life, flooded with old messages. Codes, numbers, locations. None of them made sense until one repeated. FW lot. Always followed by a time. I knew FW had to mean Fort Worth. A parking lot, probably. I drove out there one night, just to see. Stayed in my truck across the street, lights off, heart pounding like I was about to sprint. At exactly 11 p.m., 2 SUVs rolled in. Men got out, exchanged bags, no words. It lasted less than 5 minutes, then they were gone. I didn't need to get closer. I understood enough. This was one of their arteries, and I had just located a vein. I didn't go back the next night. Or the one after. I waited. I needed to be sure before I did something irreversible. On the 3rd week, I stuffed one duffel with a portion of the cash, maybe $1 million, no more, and drove out there. I didn't plan to hand it off, not yet. I just wanted to test if the current was strong enough to pull me in. At 11 p.m. I parked, hard hammering so hard I thought it might blow through my chest. The SUVs arrived, same as before. I stepped out, duffel in hand, and instantly felt a dozen eyes slice through me. No words. Just stares. One man walked up, didn't bother asking who I was. He opened the duffel, looked inside, then shut it. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just nodded once and walked away. The SUVs left, and I stood there alone, lighter by $1 million and heavier by 1,000 pounds of dread. The next day, my phone rang. Not Rick's, mine. Blocked number. Same voice as before, flat and cold. We'll be in touch. Then the line went dead. I didn't know if that was good or bad. I didn't know if I just bought myself time or painted a bigger target on my back. But the silence that followed was worse than the knock at the door. Days passed. No black sedan, no men outside the gym, no cryptic notes. It should have been relief, but it felt like the pause in a horror movie before the monster returns. Clients started noticing again. They said I looked calmer, even complimented me for finally sleeping. I smiled, played along, but inside I was waiting for the trap. I checked my truck for trackers every morning, searched the gym for bugs, memorized the faces of everyone who lingered too long. The paranoia never left, it just wore a new mask. 2 weeks later the call came. Same block number. Same voice. But this time, instructions. Drive to Laredo. Mile marker 147. Midnight. That was it. No please, no explanation. Just a command. I didn't have to think twice. I knew this wasn't optional. If I ignored it, they'd drag me out of bed. If I showed up, maybe I could survive another day. So I packed another duffel, $2 million this time, and hit the road. The drive was endless, flat highways cutting through Texas night, my headlights carving tunnels in the dark. Every mile felt like an hour. Every exit felt like a chance to turn back. I didn't. At midnight I pulled off at 147. A dirt road stretched into nothing. 2 trucks waited, lights off. I drove up slow, killed the engine, stepped out with the bag. My knees shook, but I kept walking. A man opened the duffel, same silent routine. He looked at me longer this time, then said one word. Later. That was it. They took the money, and I drove away, pulse rattling in my ears. I didn't know what later meant. Later they'd call me again? Later they'd decide if I lived? Later they'd come collect the rest? As I drove back to Dallas, one truth finally settled in my bones. There was no giving it back. No clean way out. I had crossed the line, and now I was part of their ledger. I wasn't a thief anymore. I was an investment. And investments always pay. One way or another. After Laredo, I stopped being a man with stolen money and started being a man on a leash. The cartel didn't treat me like a thief anymore, they treated me like an asset. And that was worse. A thief gets punished, an asset gets used. The first favor came quick. A call at 3 a.m, same dead voice, no introduction. Pick up Irving. 4 a.m. That was it. No details, no context. I didn't dare say no. I drove out, heart in my throat, and found a small warehouse already half open. Inside were 3 boxes, duct-taped shut. No one spoke to me. A guy in gloves just pointed at my truck bed. I loaded them in and drove. They called me mid-route, told me where to drop them. I didn't ask questions, didn't look inside. By sunrise I was back in Dallas, training a client, counting reps like my life wasn't unraveling at both ends. That became the rhythm. Calls at odd hours, runs between towns, drops I never asked about. Sometimes it was bags, sometimes boxes, sometimes a man who climbed into my passenger seat without a word. I never saw weapons, but I didn't need to. The silence was weapon enough. And every time I completed a run, I'd get another call. Good. Later. Always. Later. That word dug into me like a hook. I told myself I was playing along to survive. That if I kept my head down, gave them back their money piece by piece, they'd let me walk away. But deep down I knew there was no walking away. The 5 million wasn't just cash, it was a chain. I had touched it, taken it, and now it defined me. The gym became a front in more ways than one. They'd send men posing as clients, dropping cash on the counter for training packages they never used. They'd sit through half a session, then leave. Sometimes they didn't even bother changing into gym clothes. To outsiders, it looked like I was building a booming business. In reality, I was laundering money I couldn't say no to. My studio stopped being mine the day their first duffel crossed the threshold. It killed me inside, because clients I cared about still came. The cop, the single mom, the weekend athletes. They had no idea they were lifting weights in a place already claimed by blood money. I'd correct their form, adjust their stances, nod like everything was fine, all while waiting for my burner phone to vibrate with the next set of instructions. My father called one evening, voice weak but proud. He said he didn't know who had covered his bills, but it must have been me. He told me I was a good son. I nearly broke down on the phone. If he knew where the money came from, he never used that word again. But I let him believe it. That was the cruelest part. My only act of love was built on a lie that could get him killed if the wrong ears caught it. The breaking point came one night when they sent me south again. This time, not with boxes, but with a man. He slid into the truck without a word, reeked of sweat and iron. We drove 2 hours in silence until I dropped him at a motel. He got out, left without looking back. Minutes later, another car pulled in. I didn't stick around to see more. I drove off, gripping the wheels so tight my palms bled. When I got home, I sat in the dark and finally admitted the truth. I wasn't a middleman anymore. I wasn't even a trainer. I was property. The cartel had turned me into a mule, and every time I obeyed, I dug myself deeper into a grave I couldn't even see yet. The irony was brutal. I had taken 5 million to escape a life I thought was crushing me. Instead, I had bought a cage I couldn't break. And the worst part? Some small, sick part of me felt relief. Because being useful meant they hadn't killed me yet. But usefulness has an expiration date. And when that day came, I knew they wouldn't knock. They just erased me, like I was never here. It's strange how fast you can adjust to hell if it keeps you alive. By the 3rd month, the phone calls didn't make me jump anymore. I just listened, obeyed, drove where they told me. I stopped asking myself why or for how long. Survival had boiled down to mileage, fuel, and keeping my mouth shut. But the calm was fake, and I knew it. I was living inside a borrowed hourglass, and the sand was running out. The proof came one night in late October. I had just finished a late session at the gym when I noticed 2 new SUVs in the lot. Not the usual watchers. New plates, new faces. One of them rolled down a window, and a man inside said, "Get in." No threats, no guns, just 2 words that weighed more than a barrel of cement. I left my truck, slid into the back seat. The smell of leather and cigarettes choked the air. Nobody spoke for 20 minutes as we drove through Dallas. Finally, the man next to me leaned forward. He wasn't big, wasn't loud, but his presence pressed down on me harder than any weight rack. He said, "You took 5. You gave 3 back. You owe 2. Where is it?" The truth stuck in my throat. I hadn't touched the rest, hadn't dared spend it. It was still sitting in the storage unit under the fake name. But saying that felt like confessing I'd been holding chips back at their table. I managed to croak out, "Safe. Hidden." He nodded once. Tomorrow. Noon. You bring it. No tricks. They dropped me off at my complex like I was a kid coming home from school. No threats, no warnings. They didn't need to. My stomach was a block of ice the whole night. I barely breathed until the sun came up. The next day, I loaded the final $2 million into the bed of my truck. I didn't even try to disguise it. Drove straight to the address they texted me, an abandoned strip mall outside of town. 2 trucks waited. Same man, same presence. I carried the bags inside and dropped them at his feet. He opened one, rifled through the stacks, then looked at me. For the first time, he smiled. But it wasn't relief. It was pity. He said, "Now you're clean." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think I just bought my life back. But the word clean didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a final note on a ledger. They had collected what was theirs, which meant my use to them was finished. That night I packed a bag. Cash left over from clients, clothes, the gun. I didn't even lock the door. I drove north, no destination, just away. I told myself I'd cross state lines, vanish into some small town, start over under another name. I thought if I moved fast enough, I could outrun their shadow. But fear isn't geography. It follows you in your bloodstream. At every gas station, I scanned faces. At every motel, I checked under beds and behind curtains. I slept with the gun under my pillow, waiting for the knock that never came. The silence was worse than the chase. Days turned into weeks, and nobody followed. No cars, no calls, no notes. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like abandonment. Like they had erased me from their books, and now I was just a ghost drifting from town to town, waiting for a bullet that might never arrive. One night in Kansas, I caught myself laughing at the absurdity. I had stolen $5 million from the Gulf Cartel, returned it piece by piece, and survived. But what was survival worth when every second of it was infected with paranoia? I hadn't won. I hadn't escaped. I had just delayed my own funeral. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain: nobody takes $5 million from them and walks away clean. The question wasn't if they'd come back. It was when. Months passed, but the shadow never left. I tried to live like a man again. Cheap motels, cash jobs under the table, even a brief attempt at training clients in a small town where nobody knew me. But the weight of what I'd done sat in every breath. Every time a car slowed near me, I froze. Every knock at a door made my heart slam into my ribs. It wasn't living. It was waiting. The irony was bitter. I had gotten exactly what I thought I wanted: freedom from debt, a chance to take care of my father, a life outside the grind of the gym. But none of it belonged to me. The cartel had taken it back, piece by piece, until I was left with nothing but scars and paranoia. One night in a nameless bar, I overheard 2 men talking about Dallas. About a trainer who had vanished. One of them said, "He's dead. Nobody steals from them and breathes this long." The other laughed and said, "If he's not dead, he's wishing he was." I sat there with a drink in my hand, staring at the condensation, realizing they were right. The worst punishment wasn't a bullet. It was being left alive with no map, no anchor, no peace. I had become my own prison. I thought about going back. About calling them, begging for work, offering myself as a permanent meal. At least then I'd belong somewhere, even if that place was hell. But I knew better. Once you're marked, you don't get promoted. You get used until you're not useful anymore. The last straw came when my father passed. Not from the bills, not from neglect, just from time. I didn't even go to the funeral. Too dangerous. Too many eyes. I sat alone in a motel room, holding the obituary, and for the first time since this all started, I cried without stopping. That was when it hit me: the cartel didn't need to kill me. They had already stripped me of everything worth living for. Now I drift from place to place, a ghost wearing skin, telling myself each sunrise is a bonus round I didn't earn. Maybe one day they'll come. Maybe they won't. Maybe I'll die in a motel bed with nobody to claim the body. But what I know for sure is this: $5 million bought me nothing but fear. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't mistake desperation for courage. Don't believe money can save you when it's stained with blood. And don't ever think you can steal from people who define survival by how quickly they erase mistakes. That's all I have. That's my confession. If you made it this far, do me one favor: hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Not for me, for the next poor bastard who thinks he's strong enough to lift a weight that only breaks bones.